At dawn, the prairie lay under a veil of mist, thin as muslin, drifting across brittle grass. The horizon held no promise of warmth, only a pale, exhausted glow. An oak tree, older than memory, stretched its gnarled arms skyward, standing alone in the hush. Beneath its vast limbs, something massive and dark stirred against the earth. A horse, black as midnight, scarred, chained so cruelly that iron bit into flesh. His sides bore wounds that glistened red in the dim light. And tied to the rusted links, a slip of paper fluttered in the breeze, as if it carried secrets. It read, "Set him free if you dare. He belongs to no one." The words felt less like instruction and more like a dare whispered to the wind. Elias Crow came upon the sight by chance. A poor rancher with calloused hands and boots worn thin, he had been walking his fence lines, more out of habit than hope. He lived with debts, with the ache of failed seasons, with the memory of a wife who had left when the larder grew bare. Folks in town called him cursed, a man who could not keep a harvest or hold on to joy. And though he kept his head bowed, their whispers clung to him heavier than any saddle. Yet when his eyes fell upon the chained horse, Elias stopped breathing. The creature was immense, built like a storm-given flesh, its eyes both fierce and sorrowful. He could not look at the horse without feeling as though he gazed into a mirror, both of them bound, both bleeding in ways the world did not care to notice. The note trembled between his fingers. He could turn back now, leave the beast to die, and no one would fault him. But his hand found the horse's mane almost by instinct, and the animal flinched yet did not strike. Beneath the dirt and pain, Elias felt warmth, a pulse steady and stubborn as his own. Voices rose unbidden in his memory, the gossip of Dry Creek Town. Crow's a fool, always chasing ghosts. Can't keep land, can't keep a woman, can't keep his pride. Shame had built walls around him taller than the corral he once dreamed of filling with cattle. But in the horse's eyes he saw not judgment but recognition. They were both creatures dismissed by the world. Fear gnawed at him, yet he reached for the chain. The metal was cold, sharp-edged. He pulled a tool from his belt, its weight clumsy in his trembling hands. One strike, and the chain rang out like a gunshot in the morning quiet. The horse reared, muscles tensing, blood streaking its side. Elias staggered back but did not flee. His breath came ragged, his voice unsteady as he whispered, "Easy now, I ain't here to hurt you." Another strike, another echo through the mist. The horse stilled, nostrils flaring, watching him with something between fury and trust. Elias pressed on, his body aching, his soul caught between terror and a strange reverence. With each severed link, it was as though he was cutting away at his own shame. Finally, the last chain fell, sinking into the dirt. Silence returned, broken only by the rasp of Elias's breath. He stepped back, expecting the beast to bolt for freedom, but the horse did not move. It stayed. Their eyes met, man and animal, both scarred, both unclaimed. Elias whispered, softer now, "You're free, just like me." The mist curled around them, the oak towering above like a witness. And in that fragile moment, Elias felt something stir within him. Not luck, not triumph, but a bond forged in silence, as if the world had been waiting for this meeting all along. Elias led the horse home under a sky the color of tarnished silver, its hooves striking the dirt with the slow weight of exhaustion. The chains he had cut free clinked in a sack slung across his shoulder, heavy as guilt. By the time he reached his ranch, the sun had climbed, spilling pale gold over the sagging fences and the weathered barn that leaned like an old drunk against the horizon. Neighbors saw him from afar, and whispers ran quicker than the wind. "Crows caught trouble again," they muttered in Dry Creek Town. "Man can't feed himself. Now he's dragging home a monster. At the general store," Clara Bell heard the gossip and said nothing. A widow with kind eyes shadowed by grief, she had known Elias since before the world turned on him. She remembered when his laugh had been easy, when his wife still walked beside him. Now she watched from her doorway as he passed, the horse limping but unbroken, and her heart tilted with a quiet ache. That evening, after the townsfolk had finished their supper and their talk, she left a small bundle at Elias's gate, a loaf of bread, herbs wrapped in cloth. She did not knock, nor did she stay. Inside the ranch, Elias knelt beside the horse under lantern light. Its wounds were angry, raw against its dark coat. His hands shook as he cleaned them, not from fear of the beast, but from fear of failing it. He spoke in low murmurs, as though his words might soothe as much as the water and cloth. "You've carried worse than I can know, but you're here now, and maybe that means something." The horse flinched, then steadied as though listening. Nights bled into days. Elias brushed its mane, fed it oats from his own sparse supply, and spoke to it when silence grew too heavy. Clara began to come by, at first leaving supplies without a word, then standing longer, watching as Elias tended the horse. Sometimes she offered small advice: how to mix a poultice, how to bind a wound tighter. Her voice was gentle, her eyes avoiding his. But each time she stayed a little longer, the air between them warming like kindling catching fire. No bold words passed, only the slow bloom of trust. But peace in Dry Creek was never long-lived. Rumors carried faster than spring flood, and soon Elias learned the truth of the horse's past. The beast had belonged to Colt Maddox, a land baron with a heart like iron and fists quick to violence. Maddox had lost the horse in a crooked wager and vowed vengeance on whoever claimed it. When word reached him that Elias Crow was keeping it, his laughter was sharp and cruel. "A crow can't keep what belongs to an eagle," he spat, promising to reclaim what he saw as his. The town braced for the storm. Some pitied Elias, others mocked him. He had always been the man who couldn't hold on to anything. Soon, they thought, he'd lose this horse too. But Elias, though fear gnawed his belly, refused to bend. For the first time in years, he had something worth standing for. The night Maddox came, the wind was restless, kicking up dust that stung the eyes. Lanterns swung in the dark as Maddox and his men rode up, boots grinding against dry soil. Elias stood before his barn, lantern in hand, the horse at his side. His voice shook but did not break as he said, "He's not yours anymore." Maddox sneered, stepping forward, spurs clinking. "You think a broken man can keep a beast like that? You think luck's finally on your side? Hand him over before I take more than just the horse." Silence stretched taut as a wire. Then the horse moved, not away but forward. It stepped between Elias and Maddox, its great body casting a shadow in the lantern glow. The men faltered, unease flickering in their eyes. The horse's stance was not wild panic but fierce, deliberate protection. Its breath came heavy, its gaze locked on Maddox with a power no chain could tame. Maddox cursed, fury burning his face. But even he, with all his cruelty, would not press against a beast so willing to fight. Spitting into the dust, he turned his horse and rode off, his men trailing, their bravado broken. "You'll pay in time, Crow," his voice echoed, but it was hollow against the night. When the dust settled, Elias laid a trembling hand against the horse's neck. His eyes blurred with tears he had long refused to shed. "Thank you," he whispered, words falling like a prayer. At dawn, Clara came walking up the dirt path, the hem of her dress brushing dew from the grass. Elias was mending a fence, the horse grazing nearby, its wounds healing into scars. Clara stopped beside him, her hand brushing his arm with a quiet certainty. No words were needed. The warmth of her touch spoke louder than any declaration. Elias, for the first time in years, smiled without effort. In town, the whispers changed. They spoke not of curses now, but of resilience. "Maybe Crow ain't unlucky after all," they said, though their voices carried a note of wonder, as if unsure how to reckon with a man who had stood his ground and been met not with ruin, but with loyalty. And so the days unfolded. Man, woman, and horsebound not by chains, but by a bond forged in wounds and trust. Elias stood taller, not because fortune had turned, but because he had found something greater than luck: dignity. The tale closes with a voice like an old soul's prayer. "Some say fate comes in chains, binding us until we break. But sometimes chains fall, and what remains is not the burden, but the bond. A man, a woman, a horse, each wounded, each judged. Yet together they learned that freedom is not in running away, but in standing steady, side by side. And to those listening, The final words carry soft as wind through prairie grass. If the world calls you broken, remember, perhaps you are only waiting for the one who sees you whole.